Hi everyone, good morning. Thank you all for coming nice and bright and early. My name's Peter Richardson. I'm the CEO of Facet Amtech. So interesting from my perspective on the entrepreneurial journey, I suppose, is that I've come from an academic background where I'm starting to commercialize some research that was developed at the University of Newcastle. And that brings out some really interesting things because there's this disparity, I suppose, between the things that I've learned and the way that I've learned in terms of, business, economics, finance, legal, those sorts of things just didn't really make the cut in a formal education kind of setting when I was going through my undergraduate degree. And so I think one of the really interesting things I'd like to talk about today is kind of how I approached that transition from being a researcher just working in the lab into bringing this new tech to market. So just briefly, maybe before I kind of jump into that at a bit more high level, Facet Amtech is developing some new technology that's going to help produce one of the world's most produced chemicals, ammonia, which is used for making fertilizers mainly, a lot cheaper and a lot cleaner. So that's kind of where we're starting from. But before we get too much into that, which I'll touch on later in the talk, I'd like to dial back and go a little bit more into what's brought me here today. Now, I actually want to go back to when I was at the end of my high school career because I was really into maths and science and technology and all sorts of things when I was, year 11 and 12. I was getting really roped in by all of there's a lot of hype at the time around new technologies, nanotechnology, all of these really weird and wonderful sci-fi promises. And I kind of looked at that and I went, oh, that sounds really interesting. I'd really like to dive into that. I'd like to learn how to build those things, how to discover new ways of doing things so that we can bring these cool new things into the real world. And there's obviously at the moment something that's stopping those things from happening. And so there's new discoveries that need to happen that's going to allow us to make those technologies and bring them into the real world. So I originally decided, okay, I want to go into nanotechnology. So I looked into a Bachelor of Nanotechnology at the time, and a few people around me were saying, that's a very, very niche kind of application. Maybe you could broaden that out into something a little bit larger. And so I ended up applying for physics. And then a couple of people around me sort of said, oh, what are you going to do after you've done a physics degree other than become an academic? And I sort of scratched heads for a little while. And the result was, okay, plan B is going to be an engineering degree. So I did physics degree and a mechanical engineering degree at the same time. The engineering degree was kind of meant to be a backup plan for job security. But really what I wanted to do was go into physics, learn new things, and hopefully make some discoveries and develop some technologies. So I went through that process over the course of about 6 years. I did some casual work in some manufacturing facilities along the way, got some interesting industrial experience, even with a little bit of R&D with some local companies. And I got to the end of my degree and said, okay, this is great. I want to keep on doing technology-based things. I'm going to go into a PhD, and that's going to open some new doors. It's going to let me go into the kinds of jobs that I want. And so I went through that process. It turns out that a happy medium between physics and mechanical engineering is material science. And along the way, I ended up getting paired up with a fantastic material scientist, Professor Eric Kissy from the University of Newcastle. And he sort of took me under his wing and taught me everything that I needed to know there. And it turns out that material science is actually one of the things that's really holding a lot of technologies back these days because we can have fantastic ideas. And one of the ways that we need to approach making those ideas a reality is to have more advanced materials than what we have today. So we need to discover new things and then bring them into the real world. And so through the course of my PhD, that's what I did. I worked on developing brand new advanced materials for all kinds of weird and wonderful applications, for fusion reactors, for high-speed aerospace, for highly corrosive environments. And I spent a few years doing that. Afterwards, I fell into an even more diverse range of activities. I've done work in marine corrosion, hot water corrosion, new energy applications, hydrogen, a whole range of different things. And so I did a postdoc for a few years, and I realized, okay, at this stage, what I'm doing is publishing papers, putting them out there, and they sit on a shelf and nothing happens with them. And so I started becoming a little bit depressed with that and thought, well, high school me wanted to go into university so I could discover new things and bring them into the real world. And the way that the timing worked out for that is that I'd actually made a discovery back in my PhD that I didn't quite realize at the time, but I came back and revisited. And it turned out that one of the materials that I was developing was actually had a lot of really interesting potential for making ammonia in a new way. And so I had lots of conversations with a lot of people, and gradually this story kind of started to unfold of a possible commercial activity. And so a little bit over a year ago today, I made the call, all right, I actually want to go for this now. I've done kind of enough thinking about it. We've got enough lab data. I've got enough of a story. It's time to see if we can get this out of the lab into the real world. And that's around the time that I actually applied for the I2N pre-accelerator program, which I ended up going through last year. So I'm going to tick this now over from me being a researcher into essentially the last year and a bit, which has been that change into me becoming an entrepreneur. So I had a lot of questions. I thought I had a decent understanding of what that pathway looked like because I had had some exposure to other university spin-outs before. MGA Thermal and Diffuse Energy both came out of the same PhD office that I was working in. And so I'd been surrounded by people who'd been on that journey from researcher to entrepreneur before. And I'd seen what had happened, and I thought that I knew how it goes. And as it turns out, I did not know how it goes. So I applied for the I2N pre-accelerator. I got into that program. I did a couple of brief courses before that started and started to realize, oh, okay, there's a business model canvas. I have to start talking to customers. I have to start validating my idea and all of the things that go along with that, how to approach funding, venture capital, all of the jargon that comes along with that, how to start a company without wrecking it from the beginning. A whole bunch of stuff that I had to learn kind of myself on the fly, and it took quite a while. So I went through the I2N pre-accelerator, which is fantastic. James at the time was the entrepreneur in residence who was set up for us. Got some fantastic advice from everyone through that. In between the pre-accelerator and the accelerator, we had boot camp, which was great. We had a whole bunch of investors and industry experts from the area who would come down and talk to us for all the people who were applying to get into the I2N accelerator, and just had a really good time learning from them and speaking to them, and was starting to get some really good feedback from the investors saying, oh, the kind of technology that you're looking at now, we've got a lot of interest in already. We're keen to hear more. Ended up going through into the accelerator program, which was a little bit of obviously a follow-on from the accelerator, where again, we picked up a lot of these extra skills around, around culture, around negotiation, around all kinds of things that are just sort of important skills to start to develop as you come into, as you become, I guess, a business owner. It was around that time, partway through I think it was actually at the start of the accelerator program, so this is about halfway through last year now, that I actually started up Facet Amtech, the company, and just started to slowly develop out the story that I was going to be presenting. I started getting in touch with investors at the same time, and was working with some of them to really develop the story, understanding what it was that they wanted to see to be able to invest. Partway through, maybe 3/4 of the way through the year, started pitching to them, and by the time I got to the end of the accelerator program, we had demo night here, was kind of getting towards the tail end of having some investors on board ready to put some funding in. And kind of in parallel to all of that, I was also dealing with the university. There was some IP held by the university, so there was a negotiation that had to happen to pull that IP from the university into the new company. The investors weren't going to invest in a company if they didn't hold the IP. So that was an interesting experience, just understanding the university, largely what it was that they wanted out of this, and ultimately coming to an agreement with them, which was great news. It seems like it all happened in record time. By the end of it, it kind of all fell out in a couple of months, where a lot of companies that go through this process will take at least a year, sometimes up to 2 or even 3 years to get to an agreement with the university. So that kind of brings us up to the end of last year. We applied for yet another accelerator, the CSIRO On Accelerate program, which is similar to I2N's Accelerate, but they have a few different bits and pieces, and they have some really interesting people in their ecosystem to talk to and to provide advice. They're really well connected, especially for big industry around Australia. And so we're actually in the middle of going through that program right now. December of last year, we took in, right at the end of December, we took in some funding from our first investors, and we're off and running as of the start of this year. We've managed to bring 3 full-time employees on board. And so we've got myself, CEO, James has come on as a co-founder now, and we have another staff member, Jessica, working in the lab. So the last couple of months has really just been kind of trying to peddle the technology as hard as we can, talk to customers, trying to get strong signals from them that they're going to be happy to adopt our technology. And yeah, we're working through that at the moment. I'll get a little bit more into what's to come next, but before we get to that point, I might just jump a little bit into what Facet Amtech is, what our story is, and what we're doing, and what the problem is. So ammonia is a really critical chemical that the planet needs to survive. And the reason why is because at the moment, the majority of ammonia is used to make fertilizers, which we need to make food to keep our population surviving and thriving all around the world. It's got some other applications as well in mining, in chemicals, industries, even in textiles, things like that, but they're much smaller proportions. The caveat to that is it's also a really, really, really dirty chemical from a production standpoint. We use fossil fuels to make it, usually natural gas, sometimes coal, but normally natural gas. And we use huge amounts of it to make this chemical. For every ton of ammonia we make, we release about 2.5 tons of carbon dioxide. So it's a lot more carbon intensive per ton even than steel making or cement making. So globally, we release about 500 million tons of CO2 just from this industry. So you're all going to become experts on how to make ammonia by the end of today. But the reason why I pulled this up is it's an overview of what an ammonia plant actually looks like. And I just want to point out some of the really interesting features of it. Bearing in mind, this technology has been operating this way for the last 100 years. It's been thoroughly optimized, but it burns considerable amounts of natural gas. Essentially what the process looks like is we take in natural gas, we need to remove all of the impurities out of it, one of the main ones being sulfur. So we pass it through chemical reactor number 1. We then need to produce steam, which means we burn more natural gas up here, where it just says H2O. We burn more natural gas to turn this into steam, which we then pass through into the next chemical reactor. These pipes have a whole bunch of natural gas passing through it, and then we heat that natural gas up by burning more natural gas to get it up to about 800 degrees. We then take that and put it through a similar process where we add air. We put it through another chemical reactor where we heat it up to 1,000 to 1,200 degrees by burning more natural gas. And so you can see the process. Every time we pass through one of these chemical reactors, we're burning more natural gas to heat it up. We take some of the impurities out and we get to the edge of this black box. And it's actually everything here, which is where the ammonia is produced. Everything within the black box, its sole purpose is to take natural gas with steam as an input as well, and we turn it into the hydrogen that we need to make the ammonia. Once we have the hydrogen, we're out of this black box part. We simply run it through this cycle here, This part here is the ammonia reactor, and that's where all of the magic happens. We take the hydrogen we've made from the natural gas, and we take nitrogen that we've stripped out of the air, and they get combined together to form ammonia, which gets collected. So what the world has been asking itself is, what if we wanted to get rid of this fossil fuel process? What if we could replace it just with something like a hydrogen source? And a lot of people have been trying to do that, replacing it with green hydrogen by electrolyzing water. It's an extremely expensive way to make hydrogen. It's why there's been a lot of issues in the media at the moment trying to make green hydrogen happen, but it's a very big challenge. So our solution is similar in that we are going to look to replace this fossil fuel part of the plant, but instead of replacing it with green hydrogen made by electrolyzers, we're replacing it directly with water. So what this means is that we have the capacity to reduce that whole system and all of those chemical reactors and the components associated with them. Replacing it with a much simplified system reduces the capital cost for a new plant, reduces the maintenance and the operating costs, reduces almost all of the CO2 emissions, and dramatically reduces the price, is what we're aiming for. The material that I developed in the lab several years ago is called a catalyst. You could think of it like a powder or pellets possibly. They essentially sit in here in the chemical reactor where we pass the hydrogen and the nitrogen through usually, and they're the thing that converts those two elements together to make ammonia. In our case, we're taking air and water directly and using them as the materials that pass through this catalyst, and our catalyst specifically has unique properties that allow it to convert the water and the air directly into ammonia instead of hydrogen and nitrogen. Now, if we can make ammonia in this way, instead of using the fossil fuels, we get a lot of benefits. Not only do we reduce all of the CO2 emissions, potentially we can reduce the price a little bit as well, but we expand the market size significantly. Because of the fact that if we can make ammonia with no CO2 emissions associated with it, now we can start to use it as a clean energy or a clean fuel source. And so some of the applications that we can use for ammonia made in this way is for fuels for shipping, for giant ships. Instead of burning diesel, we replace the diesel with ammonia. There's a fair bit in the news at the moment suggesting that the majority of ships are now being built with ammonia-powered engines instead of diesel-powered engines. It's a huge market. Similar for long-haul trucking, replacing the diesel directly with ammonia. There's even some countries that are looking into replacing coal or gas in power stations with ammonia. There's been some successful international trials already replacing part of the fossil fuels with ammonia in an existing plant, and they're getting really, really promising results. So in the future, fuel for transport and power generation are looking to be by far the largest markets for ammonia instead of just fertilizers and chemicals. And you can see that on the graph about the demand for ammonia moving forward here. Noting that, so on the axis here, we're talking millions of tons per year. Up until roughly today, the demand for ammonia has increased linearly, and it matches population increase very, very closely, because of the fact that as our population increases, ammonia is usually made for fertilizers needed to make the food to feed that population, so the demand has increased proportionally. Last year, we hit global production of 200 million tons per year, and if you can see just at the edge, we've already started seeing an uptick in the demand. There's a whole bunch of international reports that have projected the demand for ammonia to increase anywhere from about 2 times current amounts to about 6 times current amounts by the year 2050. And it's because of the fact that up until now, fertilizer has been the main application, and in the future, it's going to be a clean fuel replacement that's the main application. So the next steps that we're looking to take, so we've taken in some VC funding, which has been enough to get us off the ground and running with the new development. We're in this phase now where we're going through, we've got some testing that's already been done, which has been enough to show that we're onto something here. Through this year, we're looking to undertake some really targeted lab testing so that we can produce techno-economic models, which is what our customers want to see, so they can compare the way that they produce ammonia to the way that we produce ammonia and start to piece together how we could fit into their businesses. So that's one of the really key important things that we're looking to do this year. Going into next year, we'll hopefully have a little bit more cash that we've raised so that we can start to develop larger projects, grow our team, and we'll be looking to develop a small scale pilot still at the lab scale. And in parallel to that, we'll be looking to scale the manufacturing capacity of the catalyst, which is kind of the main product that we're using, which enables our new way of making ammonia. Following that scale-up process, we'll be looking to develop some field trials with some larger partners, either nationally or internationally. And that's going to give this big, heavy, slow-moving industry the data and the evidence that it needs to start looking at this seriously and saying, yes, this is something that we're going to be interested in adopting. Following that, we'd be working with large engineering firms, most likely, to start to develop out full-scale commercial solutions. And bringing those partners on board is going to be really critical so that we can have the experience that we need to build these things at large scale. They already have a significantly large market capture, so they already work closely with the customers, and so we think that this is a really good way to go. The reason why we kind of have to go in baby steps all the way up to a full commercial product is because of the fact that it takes a lot of money to build these things at each step, and each step requires a large amount more than the previous step. And so what this is really is a de-risking exercise. At the moment, we're considered high risk because we still have some proving to do. We still have to show exactly how our technology is going to perform. And so over the next 8 years or so, we're going to be taking that risk away as we get more and more evidence that our solution works at larger and larger scales. Some of the learnings that I've had in this process are, I think that initial transition from being a researcher to being an entrepreneur, there was this big wave of there's all of this stuff that you need to figure out from day one. So I listened to hundreds of podcasts, I watched dozens and dozens of YouTube videos, I read a whole bunch of things, I spoke to a lot of people, and it seemed like it was taking a very long time to make decisions. It was taking a very long time to make decisions, and I think part of that was because of the fact that I was needing to do that self-learning at the same time. I think if I was to have jumped in and just started making decisions on things right away, I think that would have been a bad call. I think I would have made a lot of bad decisions. The advice that you get, everyone says you're gonna hear a whole bunch of different things and you have to find your own way through, and you hear that a lot. It's definitely true. I think there's a bit of a critical mass though. Once you talk to enough people from enough different backgrounds, you will actually start to see some trends. You might, for example, have 5 people that have 5 different opinions, but by the time you have 10 or 20 different opinions, you'll start to see some trends come out of the woodwork, and you'll start to realize what's industry standard, what do you need to be doing here. So I think the learning for me really is understanding that this is going to take time. It kind of has to take time. And coming from an academic background, I think we've got this sense of, we need to do everything to the letter and we have to do it perfectly. I think when it comes down to this, there's a little bit of an understanding of when you take in people's advice, no one else knows how to do it perfectly either. So you have to eventually make your own decision on something, and you fall very squarely into the position of you're never going to satisfy everyone. So you have to find out what's the best decision for you and your company, and you have to make the call. If it goes wrong, or if you think it could have been done a different way, if you think something needs to be fixed because of a decision, then that's your job. So what do we need? If there's anybody out there in the audience, what we're working through now is starting to talk to some larger customers. We've had some success. We've had some people give us introductions to people that they know. We've reached out to some people cold, and we've had a mixture of success across the board. We've started to really nail down who our customers are. We've spoken to a bunch of them, and there's a few that we have tried so many times and we just cannot find someone to talk to us from those companies. And that's one of the things that's really becoming important at the moment. So what I'll ask for any of you in the audience or anybody who's watching the video online, if you know anybody from ThyssenKrupp, specifically from the UHDE division, which is their chemical plant division, or if you know people from Casal or even the Port of Newcastle, would really appreciate some kind of introduction. That would be great. Port of Newcastle is a little bit of a funny one. Obviously, we're sitting in Newcastle now, and you would think, oh, there's loads of people around that know someone from the Port of Newcastle. And while that's true, they've been going through some restructures, and we're still finding it just a little bit challenging to get in front of the right kind of people. So if there is anybody out there, please let me know. So once again, we're Facet Amtech. We're looking to revolutionize the ammonia industry. That's just a little bit of an update about what we've been up to and what my journey has been like in getting there. So thank you very much for coming along. Happy to take some questions.
That was awesome. Thank you. I feel like they were some of the most helpful diagrams I have ever seen.
Do you feel like you've learned a lot now?
I truly do. I truly do, because I obviously have friends who are not in the entrepreneurship space, and sometimes they're like, oh, what do you have on this week? And I say, got startup stories, and I try and explain it. And they're like, oh, how does he do that? And I'm like, I will learn on Wednesday. And I did learn. So thank you for that. They were really, really helpful.
No problem.
Before we jump into some of the questions that people submitted at registration, I did have my own for you. And it's just more about what you said at the end with your learnings and kind of like going from that academic to entrepreneurship space. How did it feel for you when you kind of realised that you have to take on this role of founder and like owner of a business and entrepreneur?
I think there's a lot of feelings to it. It was exciting because it was something new, and I've had a bit of a passion, I think, for learning more than anything. And also within that, this has kind of been common among my undergrad stuff and my postgrad stuff. I think within that I've had this passion for detective work, I like to call it. So for finding little cookie crumbs of evidence and following them and getting new insights and new information and looking at things in a certain way. And the entrepreneurship has a lot of those elements in it as well. So I think there was definitely an element of excitement in that I can continue doing that, which was great. There's a lot of different things that you become when you become a founder. Everyone kind of says this, you become the marketing person and the finance person and the tech person and the sales person, and all of that's true. I think for me, it's just been I'm still just a human. I can only do so many things in the hours that I have, and so for me, it comes down to I've got a list of priorities. At the moment, it's about 3 pages long. And there are things that have been on there that I just have not got to in a long time because they haven't made it to the top of the list. And so I think for me, it's important just to keep that in mind, is that there's certain things that are always going to take priority, and there's new things that are going to come along that are going to become new high priorities. And that's just the way it is. Yes, there's sort of stress associated with being, responsible for all of these things, and now, now that we have some funding in and we're off and running, it's like, okay, well, now we're responsible for keeping the company going so that we can survive long enough to get some more money, so that we can develop some stuff so that we can survive long enough to get some more money. It's a bit of that case. Sometimes I try not to think about it too much and just get on with things. But there are times where it becomes stressful too. So yeah, a mixed bag of emotions, I think.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I think that's the journey of being an entrepreneur, right? But what I really loved about that is that your first word was excited. And so I think that's really great, is that your first reaction is, this is exciting. But then you're like, oh gosh, all these other things.
Yeah, that's right, absolutely.
So we have a question from Blake that says, would you / have you considered selling the IP for the catalyst to an existing chemtech company? If so, why or why not?
We have considered it. The thing that we are kind of a bit more interested in is rather than selling it outright to a catalyst company. And so I think maybe I'll dial back a little bit. Something I think I'd really like to clarify from what it is that we're doing is the discovery that we made was a new type of catalyst. It kind of makes ammonia a bit cheaper, but the really exciting part is not just that it's a catalyst, it's that it enables this completely new way of making ammonia that other people can't do because their catalyst won't survive in that particular way. And so the thing that the catalyst does is it unlocks this new process for making ammonia, rather than just the catalyst itself being a thing to sell. We looked into the economics for a little while of just what happens if we make the catalyst and just sell it straight into existing ammonia plants. And sure, you make some money, but it actually turned out it was going to be really quite difficult for our company ourselves to make money because of the fact that they've got a very long lifetime, so you're usually only making a sale once every 20 years. And there's not a lot of ammonia plants because they need to be very large so that they can make ammonia economically. So the fact that we've found this way to actually have a completely new way to make ammonia is, I think, the real core to our company as it stands. And so I think it would be a bit of a shame if we were just to throw away the catalyst itself by selling it to a catalyst company. Mm-hmm. Some of the things that we're a little bit more interested in are potential licensing deals with catalyst companies, or even partnering with them to help develop out the manufacturing at scale. So I think probably just an outright sale of the catalyst is probably not what we're looking for. There may be some ultimate kind of, could be once we've developed enough IP of combined catalyst and system, that might be at the stage then when the IP is a little bit stronger, potentially a little bit more valuable. That might be when we start to look at sale potentially, but not at this stage.
Great, that was a great answer, thank you. We have a question from Tracy that says, what's the biggest surprise as you transition from research into commercialization? And what's been an unexpected challenge of taking your solution to market? And what advice would you give to other researchers who might like to jump into Foundry? It's a lot of questions there.
That's all right. Probably, I think the surprise and the challenge are the same thing. And I think it comes down to, for me, and this is, I think is probably something that's a little bit different for everyone that goes through this process. There was a little bit of a challenge trying to, so everyone I'll make this clear, everyone who's spinning out from a university goes through this challenge. The challenge just looks a little bit different for each of them. But it's a challenge with coming up with an agreement with the university that kind of suits everyone. No two companies are the same, and the things that kind of went into, let's say, for example, the IP that is behind a company that potentially becomes a spin out, that doesn't look the same for any two companies either. And I think that was also the case for us. And so when you start to engage with the universities, there's this kind of big hurdle to get over in terms of expectations and requirements on both sides. And I think just juggling that can be quite tricky. And again, everyone goes through that process. Everyone finds that tricky. It takes a very long time. One of the things that I guess I found surprising was the things that I thought mattered to the university were not necessarily the things that I thought were the things that would matter to the university. And so it kind of got to, the end of a whole bunch of long discussions to get to that point of understanding of, actually, this is the reason why we're getting stuck here. And once we got to that point, it was a little bit easier for everyone to overcome, because all it meant was, there's actually just a couple of missing bits of information here that really set the context that make it easier for all of this to go forward. So I think that was a big surprise for me. My advice for researchers wanting to have a go at this is, I think if you have the opportunity to, and acknowledging that it's not something that everybody has the opportunity to do, because it's obviously a big risk deciding to leave a university and start a company. In my case, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity where the timing made sense. Just go for it, but make sure that you get yourself up to speed with all of the things that you have to look out for, which is a bit of a tricky thing to answer, right? How do you know the things that you don't know about? And so one of the ways to address that is by just talking to people. You have to start talking to people, and you have to get to the point where you've spoken to enough people that you start to see those trends that I was talking about before. And it's because of the fact that it's relatively risky at the start of a company. There are ways that you can really significantly stuff a company up from the start if you do it a little bit wrong. So coming to something like a pre-accelerator, even just talking to the people here at I2N is a great place to start. If there's people who have other colleagues within the university who have done similar things in the past, that's a useful option too. I'll also make the point that leaving the university to start a company is not the only way to commercialize research out of the university. You can still work at the university, work on the research. You might need an industry partner or somebody that you're working with, and that's a way to kind of develop the cool tech that might be the thing that you like doing and get it out of the university into the real world without you actually having to leave and doing it yourself. So that's an option too.
I really like that point that you just made about it being an opportunity that not everyone gets, and so if you do have something that can be commercialized, that you should go for it. So thank you for saying that. Also, what I really loved that you just said was you said have a go at building the company, and I love that that's the words you use, because sometimes it has to just feel that casual of just give it a go, like have a go at building
sometimes you just have to feel it out a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely, great. And we have a question from Boris. I really like this one. I know that you are currently in another accelerator program, so it might be hard for you to kind of think about this fully, but any advice would be good. So Boris says it's easy to get caught up in the hype of a startup when participating in an accelerator, and this is good from an energy and momentum building perspective. But how have you found the journey post I2N Accelerator? Yeah,
good question, Boris. I liked it.
You got more.
You got more. Cool. All right. You can keep stewing on them. My answer to how do you deal with the come down of the hype after an accelerator is go into another accelerator. So that's one way around it. On that though, there seems to be a little bit of a people getting stuck in the cycle of doing accelerator after accelerator, and I don't think that that's a good idea either. I think you do them as long as you still find value in them. And so we've gone into the CSIRO on Accelerate program for a few specific reasons, and it's because of those specific reasons that we're doing them. If it was just another repeat of the I2N Accelerate program, we wouldn't have been doing it. It was a fine line making the call to actually go and do it in the first place. Because yes, you'll probably end up wasting some time repeating information that you already know. One of the differences between the I2N Accelerator and the CSIRO one is, at the moment, the CSIRO ones, a lot of the content is online. So it's not quite as, I suppose, hands-on in terms of like coming and setting up for a full day to do a whole bunch of work with the cohort every week, like it was in the accelerator. And so it's a little bit different. The hype maybe is not quite as much. And because of the fact that we're now off the ground, we've got an office of 3 where we've kind of got our day-to-day operations as well. We've kind of got a little bit of that side of things too. We were pretty fortunate to be able to get some VC funding to get us off the ground, and I imagine it would be more challenging if you had come out of an accelerator program wanting to continue your venture that you've been spending the last 6 months working on commercializing, and then falling back into now I need to pay the bills, so now I need to fall back into my job. Now I don't have as much time to put into the company. I can imagine that becoming a bit of a depressing situation. I'll come back to you at the end of the CSIRO program and let you know what the changes are after that. But yeah, that's how it's kind of feeling at the moment. We've sort of fallen a little bit into day-to-day operations, which, because we're lucky enough to be funded, is fine.
Okay, thank you. That kind of finalises our questions from the Eventbrite registration. Now we do have like 10 to 15 minutes for some of you guys to ask some questions as well. But before we jump to that, I do have a feedback survey. We do a feedback survey after these events just so that we can understand what it is that you liked about it, what you'd like to see more of, those kind of things, so that we can really create events that you want to come to. So if everyone could just fill that out, it's only 3 questions, so it'll only take a minute, if that. Boris has already got his hand up, he's ready. he's ready.
When you were dealing with IP with the uni, you said it took a couple of months. The 2 things, I'd love to know who you were dealing with at the uni for that to be able to only take a couple of months. But also, you said you kind of initially sort of misassumed what probably their key needs were. So what were their sort of needs that once you addressed, just kind of got you over the line? Are you able to divulge that?
I'm sure I can talk around it, yeah. I don't think any of it's necessarily confidential or anything. So I say, when I said that it took a few months to kind of get through the university system, that's probably a little bit of an oversimplification. It was kind of a year start to finish, where at the start of the year kind of had a few conversations, and it was kind of clear at that point we were hitting a bit of a roadblock. And so at that point we just said, okay, we're just going to put this down and just leave it for a little bit. And so the first conversations were through the tech transfer office. So every university will have a tech transfer office. It's the department which is responsible for taking research that's developed at the university and commercialising it in whatever way, shape or form that might be. At the University of Newcastle, it's the KEY team, Knowledge Exchange and Enterprise. Got it?
Does that come under Zoom?
Yeah, so...
Does Warwick look after that as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess there's a bit of a hierarchical system within there. They've got a director for Key, they've got some business development people under there, they've got a spin-out manager. So there's a few people in that chain. And so I was speaking with, some of the people lower down in that chain. Got to the point where we were kind of talking about negotiations, and it kind of became clear a little bit that the people I was talking to sort of at the bottom of the chain didn't quite have the negotiating power that was needed to kind of get to the next step. So we ended up kind of back at the top. The second thing that kind of came into that was some expectations with some advice and some expectations with our investors that we had about what does the company need to look like moving forward to make sure that you're in good shape. And so when it comes to, particularly if it's an equity spin-out deal, which most universities are going through at the moment, that becomes an important factor. And so we're working with the investors and with the university. We were eventually able to kind of come to an agreement on something that worked for both sides. So by the time we got to that agreement of yes, we're kind of happy to go through with it, that was the starting the 3-month timer essentially to get through all of the paperwork and approvals and everything that needed to be done.
Did having the I2N experience help build some leverage for the case to we need to actually make this work? Sort of more like, because there's a bit of a public face around that, so
yeah,
it's kind of like we can play hardball, or we kind of, did that help at all, and having James on board as well?
I think it was collectively, so yes is the answer, but I think it was more than that. It was collectively all of the people that I'd managed to speak to. So some people that had been through the University of Newcastle before, some people who'd been through other universities, the same process at other universities before, a bunch of different investors that kind of said, look, this is what we need to see at this sort of stage. So yeah, a bunch of different people with advice, even some podcasts, even data online on LinkedIn from, here's what we expect, pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B stage companies to have for their founder equity remaining. So you can then take that and kind of model it out based on what you think you might need to be spending in terms of your equity to make sure that you're leaving yourself enough for later.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? Yeah?
I wanted to know, you said you were founded, and so I don't know if actually, for example, you are still working part-time or full-time with university, and so if now you are, let's say, fully dedicated to your company, at what stage of your journey did you decide to, okay, now I have to quit my job and be fully focused on that?
So yes, I'm full-time on the company, so not being paid by the university anymore, but we have some agreements and a relationship that means that we can still stay on campus, have some office space and use of lab space. In terms of when did I decide, this kind of ties into the timing was right for me, because for those who don't know what happens if you finish a PhD and go into just a research role at the university, they call that a postdoc. That's usually government funded. And so the government funds a project to your supervisor, and your supervisor then employs you to work on this project, which is often for anywhere between 1 and 3 years. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but usually 3 years is about the most. And so what happens is a lot of the time you end up with these postdocs that kind of bounce around from project to project unless they're lucky enough to have a supervisor that wins grant after grant after grant and can keep them employed, for an extended period of time, but on new projects. And so in my case, I was coming up to my project being finished, so my contract was kind of at its end, and it was a case of either I have to bounce somewhere else, which could have meant moving to a different university somewhere else in the country or even internationally, or why don't I give this a crack? And so that was kind of the choice. I figured I'm going to give this a crack. And as it turned out, the timing of the end of my contract coming up was pretty much in line with when we were able to get fully funded and starting work on the company.
Great. Amazing. Anyone else have a question? Yes?
I have to ask about the elephant, not in the room, but over there.
Yep.
Have you spoken to Orica?
Yeah, we've had a couple of conversations with Orica. Yeah, and we've had some good conversations. We're planning on following up with them a little bit more as well. Obviously, the fact that they are just over there, I also like to point out this window at them. I've done that a few times before. And yeah, there's only, I think, 7 ammonia plants in the country, and there's only 1 in New South Wales, and so we're lucky that it's right here. So it's a really good opportunity for us to be able to use them if they turn out to be the right fit for us as a customer.
We have time for about one more question. Does anyone have one? James, I've been expecting a hard question from you.
So as a freshly minted accelerator participant, what was missing? Now that because we always ask right at the end of the program, and everybody doesn't know what was missing because they haven't run into all the hurdles yet. So now that you're like 4 months down the track, what was missing, or what did you get to and went, oh, yeah.
And don't be worried that the staff are here.
So one of the things that I noticed going through, it was actually more in the accelerator than in the pre-accelerator. I don't think it was as much for me, but I know it was for some of the other participants, so the format for the accelerator when I went through last year was most weeks a guest would be brought in to talk about a specific topic. It might be about negotiation, it might be about venture capital, it might be about a whole range of things. And one of the things that kind of kept on coming up was there's a lot of jargon in this industry, and a lot of people were getting kind of quite caught up on it. It's the first time a lot of people were hearing about an ESOP, or what vesting equity is, or how how to calculate company valuations based off investment amounts and all of these sorts of things. Potentially something that would have been interesting to do would be to front load a bit of a concise session on here's this random jumble of things that you don't know about that is going to be really important for you going forward. We're going to give you a package. We want you to read it, or even if there's a short podcast series that could be recommended or something like that, just so that everyone can kind of be brought up to speed. I think that could be potentially something interesting.
Like a long-form glossary.
Yeah, I know actually that there's some people that are starting to put out things like that at the moment. So some good resources on that. That could potentially be interesting.
Great. That was a really great one. I haven't heard that one before. Does anyone have any quick last-minute questions? We do have maybe 30 seconds.
Your IP and your patency, who holds that, and what was the transition to the company?
So at the start, it was a little bit all over the place. It is now fine. So I held some personally, the university held some, we had an industry partner that held some. And essentially it became a matter of negotiating with all of those people to have it put into the company. I had to put my IP into the company as well, assign it directly in. So that all of the IP could be held by the company, and we've now got a patent that's a provisional patent that's been lodged.
Worldwide?
Just a provisional at the moment. So by the time it's sat there for a year, it'll be put worldwide. Yeah. So at the moment, it's not, the details of it aren't public, it's just been lodged, so it's time-stamped as of now. That's another one of the new things to figure out is how patenting works, which as it turns out is rather complicated.
Who would have thought?
Yeah. They could have just made it simple and no, decided not to.
Okay, well that's the end of our Q&A. Can everyone please just put their hands together for Peter? Thank you so much. Now we do have obviously a lot of events that we throw at I2N. I do have a couple of them coming up. That's you again. We have the Brilliantly Bad Pitch competition, which is happening next week. It's basically where you have a really terrible idea and you have to pitch it really well. I'm really excited. We threw this one last year and it was a really big success. Turns out that people really like having bad ideas. So please come along to that one. It's going to be really fun. And then we also have our May edition of Startup Stories, which is going to be Storm Menzies from By Storm Beauty. It's going to be a little bit later in the month. It's on the 14th of May rather than the first Wednesday. But I hope that you can come along to that. Otherwise, please reach out to myself or anyone else on the I2N team if you have any questions about how we can help support you and your venture. Thank you so much. Have a great Wednesday.